the invisible debt your soul keeps paying. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep can't touch, a fatigue that settles not in the muscle, but in the spirit. It shows up in the morning as heaviness. It lingers in the heart as apathy. It echoes in the silence between your thoughts, whispering that no matter what you do, nothing seems to move, nothing seems to change. You're not lazy, you're not broken, you're energetically in debt. Dr. David Hawkins teaches us that holding on to low-frequency emotion, resentment, guilt, shame, fear, creates a dense vibrational field. That density consumes more energy than your body can regenerate. It pulls from your reserves, it burns through your vitality, and it does so silently, day after day. Dr. Joe Dispenza expands this by explaining that your brain, when flooded with repetitive thoughts and emotion, reactivates the same neural pathways over and over. Stress hormones are released again and again, and in that loop, the past isn't just remembered, it's relived moment by moment, cell by cell. This creates something few people talk about: emotional interest, a compounding cost paid in exhaustion, stagnation, and a sense of disconnection from possibility. The energy that could have been used to create, to rise, to expand, is instead used to maintain an outdated version of self that no longer serves you. And the result? You feel stuck. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're still energetically financing something that should have already ended. So the question emerges, quiet, piercing, undeniable. What if you're living in survival mode because your energy is still paying for your past? What if the weight you feel isn't yours anymore? What if the debt you keep carrying could be cleared, not by doing more, not by trying harder, but by remembering who you are beneath the weight, beneath the repetition, beneath the stories that no longer belong to you, the spiritual exhaustion you've come to call normal. There's a kind of weight that becomes so familiar you stop noticing it. It lives in your breath. It lingers in your body. It follows you in silence through routines, tasks, conversation, and slowly it teaches you to settle, to expect less, to dream smaller, until numbness becomes your baseline and survival becomes your rhythm. Most people walk through life carrying this invisible heaviness, emotional fatigue, lack of joy, the dull ache of going through the motions without truly feeling alive. They say, "I'm just tired," but it's not the kind of tired that rest cures. It's the kind of tired that comes from a soul stretched too thin by unresolved patterns and outdated emotional debt. Dr. David Hawkins names this state for what it is: a consequence of drained life force. The exhaustion isn't just emotional. It's energetic. Your field, your nervous system, your body are all working overtime to sustain emotional patterns that were never meant to last this long. And when your energy is being used just to hold together the pain, the mask, the version of yourself you no longer resonate with, there's no room left for inspiration, no space left for intuition. The creative impulse, spontaneous joy, the spiritual clarity, they get muted. Your body senses this. It enters survival mode, a kind of low-power state where the bare minimum is maintained and everything else, growth, connection, purpose, gets delayed, postponed, forgotten. And so the days begin to repeat. The goals shift, but the energy stays the same. You want to change. You try to change. But change doesn't come through force. It comes through frequency, because what you're calling normal may actually be a prolonged energetic emergence, a signal that your soul is trying to get your attention, not to scare you, but to remind you this is not your natural state. There is more. There is lightness. There is clarity. But it cannot rise until you stop accepting depletion as your truth, until you remember that being alive was never meant to feel this heavy. The invisible error, continuing to energetically feed what should have ended. There are places within you still receiving your energy, even though they've long since stopped giving anything back. Emotions you thought were buried, people you no longer speak to, but still carry in your chest. Stories that ended, but somehow still echo every time you try to move forward. You're not doing this on purpose, not conscious, but some part of you is still plugged into what no longer lives, what no longer nourished, what no longer matches who you are becoming. And every moment of attention, every flicker of memory, every hidden loyalty to who you used to be costs something. Dr. David Hawkins calls this loving suffering more than freedom, a phrase that stings, not because it judges, but because it reveals. There is a strange comfort in the familiar pain, in replaying the old story, in keeping one foot in the past while trying to step into something new. But the truth is simple and unavoidable. What you continue to energize continues to live, even if it's only living in your vibration. Emotions you haven't allowed yourself to fully feel, agreements you've made with versions of yourself that no longer exist, relationships that drain but remain uncut, because a part of you still believes letting go means failure. These are all unpaid vibrational contracts. They bind your energy, they feed your fatigue, and the longer you keep them open, the more your soul pays into it. You may not see it, but the cost is real. Every day spent investing in what's already complete is a day spent postponing your expansion. The shift begins not with action, but with recognition. With asking, what am I still feeding that should have been released? Because until you stop financing the old, the new has no space to enter, not because you aren't ready, but because your energy is still in someone else's hand, in somewhere else's memory, in something else's timeline. And freedom, real, embodied, vibrational freedom, begins the moment you stop energizing what was and start aligning with what is. The counterintuitive revelation: your vibrational field has an energetic credit limit. There is a limit, not a punishment, not a failure, a natural boundary. Your energetic field, your vibrational presence, is not infinite in capacity. It's intelligent, sensitive, responsive, but it has limit. And many people don't feel stuck because they lack desire. They feel stuck because they've reached that limit without even knowing it. Dr. Joe Dispenza explains this clearly. When the majority of your energy is being used to sustain trauma, rehearse pain, or resist what needs to be released, there's very little, sometimes nothing, left for creation, for vision, for transformation. You may want something new, but energetically, you're maxed out. It's like trying to paint a masterpiece on a canvas already full of unfinished sketches and old layers of color. The space is occupied, the energy is spoken for, and so you try harder. You meditate, you visualize, you affirm, but nothing moves. Not because the universe isn't listening, but because there's no room, no available frequency to hold something different. This is where many people get caught in the illusion of manifestation. They think wanting something deeply is enough. But wanting is not creating. Energy is. Coherence is. Spaciousness is. Until you clear what no longer belongs in your field, the emotional contracts, the looping thoughts, the invisible grief, you'll keep trying to build from a place of energetic overload. Hawkins taught us that clarity and freedom don't come from effort. They come from alignment. They come when you stop feeding what drains you and start reserving your energy for what expands you. You don't need more tools. You need more space. You need more vibrational credit. And that begins by asking one of the most important questions on the path of awakening. What am I still paying for with my energy? That's no longer worth the cost, because only when you stop spending your field on the past can the future finally afford to arrive. Practical exercise: how to do a vibrational inventory to clear your energy debt. Sometimes the most powerful shift doesn't come from a breakthrough. It comes from an inventory, a quiet, honest look at what your energy is still carrying, not to judge, but to see, to recognize what drains, what lingers, what no longer serves, and yet still lives inside your field. This is not a list of tasks. It's a map, a mirror, a moment of clarity that begins with presence. Step 1, make the list. Gently, truthfully, write down every weight you still carry: unspoken grief, old anger, names you can't forget, patterns you keep repeating, spaces that feel heavy, roles that no longer fit. Everything, no filter. Step 2, one by one, bring them into awareness and ask, does this lift me or does it weaken me? Feel it in your chest, in your breath, in your body. Not from the mind, but from your nervous system. Your body knows, it remembers. Step 3, choose one, just one, and offer it a small act of closing, a word of forgiveness, a boundary, a new response, a moment of silence that says, this is no longer mine to carry. Dr. David Hawkins reminds us that release doesn't require outer action. It requires inner alignment. It requires the courage to stop fighting what already ended and to stop fueling what never truly served your becoming. This is not about fixing everything at once. It's about creating a shift in direction. One choice, one truth, one breath at a time. And with every piece you release, not because you're angry, not because you're escaping, but because your soul is ready, your field becomes lighter, clearer, stronger. The energy that once financed pain becomes available for creation, for present, for joy. Because healing is not about doing more, it's about carrying less. And sometimes it all begins with a single question written at the top of a page. Where is my energy still living that I have already outgrown. Subtle signs your energy is still tied to the past and how to reverse. Sometimes it doesn't scream. It whispers in the form of sleepless night, in thoughts that circle endlessly without landing anywhere, in a strange heaviness that wraps itself around your body when you're about to begin something new, in the way your passion fades for things that once lit you up. These aren't flaws, these aren't failure, these are signals, signs that your energy is still leaking into timelines that have already ended, into versions of you that no longer need to sustain. Dr. David Hawkins said it simply: the mind repeats what the heart has. That is what so many people are experiencing, not mental noise, but emotional resonance, not confusion, but unprocessed memory still echoing through the nervous system. When your energy is still rooted in the past, the present feels foggy. It's hard to decide, hard to trust, hard to move, not because you don't want to, but because your field is entangled with old frequencies, making each step feel heavier than it should. Procrastination becomes chronic, not from laziness, but from energetic dissonance. You don't move forward because a part of you still believes it's unsafe to do so. Pleasure disappears, not because life is empty, but because your ability to feel it is being blocked by unresolved cycles. To reverse this, presence is required. Radical, loving presence, the kind that doesn't demand change, but brings, the kind that doesn't rush to fix. Simply ask, where am I still vibrating out of habit rather than intention? The shift happens when you stop running from the signal and start listening to it. When you choose to feel where the leak is, even if it's tender, even if it's old, even if it feels endless. And from that awareness, breathe. You soften, you choose a new thought, a new emotion, a new alignment, not forced, not dramatic, just honest. Because the moment you stop ignoring the signs, they stop needing to repeat themselves. And slowly, your energy returns, your clarity returns, your life begins to move again, not because something outside changed, but because you finally did. The cracked magnetic field metaphor. Why nothing holds when you're in vibrational debt. Imagine pouring water into a vessel that looks whole but has cracks you cannot see. You keep filling it again and again, and yet it never feels full. The water disappears slowly, quietly, leaving you wondering where it went, wondering why it's never enough. This is what happens to your life force when your vibrational field is fractured, not broken, just cracked. Thin, invisible fractures caused by unresolved emotion, denied truth, unspoken pain. You keep receiving, but you can't hold. You keep trying, but nothing seems to lack. Dr. David Hawkins teaches that vibrational integrity begins not with perfect, but with coherent. Feeling what is true, accepting what has been, releasing what no longer serves. Without this, everything you try to build becomes temporary, not because you're unworthy, but because the field can't sustain what it hasn't yet been prepared to hold. Spiritual practices in this state become compensation. You meditate, hoping to silence the inner noise. You journal, hoping to find answers. You affirm, hoping to rewrite your reality. But underneath, there's still leaking. There's still law. You don't need more effort. You need alignment. You need restoration of your magnetic field, not through doing, but through allowing, through honesty, through inner coherence. True abundance doesn't respond to how hard you try. It responds to the clarity of your signal. It arrives when the field is whole, when the inner vibration is clean, when you no longer seek to hold more, but to heal deeper. Because once the field is sealed, once the energy has a place to land, what you call in begins to stay. It begins to grow, not because you forced it, but because now you're ready to hold. How the universe responds to those who pay their internal energy debt. There's a moment, quiet, often unexpected, when the field begins to shift. You may not even notice it at first. Breath feels lighter, a conversation flows easier, a synchronicity appears where before there was only resistance. Something begins to move, not because you tried harder, but because you stopped resisting. As you release old stories, not by force, but by truth. As you silence the loop, not with distraction, but with presence. As you begin to let go of what no longer resonates with who you are now becoming, something extraordinary begins to happen. The field reorganized. Dr. Joe Dispenza teaches that the quantum field does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you are, to the frequency you broadcast consistently, unconsciously, and continuously. And when that signal shifts, when you begin to live as someone who is no longer energetically indebted to the past, the universe adjusts. People change around you, not because you ask them to, but because your vibration no longer matches the dynamics that once drained you. Opportunities show up, not because you chase them, but because the space they needed finally exists. Emotions stabilize, not because life became easier, but because your inner world stopped resisting itself. And in this recalibrated space, something new enters. Flow, not the forced kind, but the real kind, the kind that doesn't need to be pushed, the kind that arrives naturally because your field is now clean enough to receive. This is how energy works. This is how the universe speaks, not in words, but in reflection, not in promises, but in pattern. When your presence becomes whole, when your frequency becomes clean, when your choices align with truth, life stops feeling like a battle to win. It becomes what it always wanted to be: a mirror, a dance, a sacred response to the version of you that finally remembered who you truly are and what you are no longer willing to carry. Energy debt isn't paid through effort, it dissolves through clarity. There's a truth, quiet, powerful, often overlooked, that everything you've been carrying, everything that feels heavy, stuck, unresolved, doesn't need to be paid off like a punishment. It simply needs to be seen. Dr. David Hawkins reminds us, everything you release loses power over you. Everything you face with truth begins to dissolve. This isn't a metaphor. It's vibrational law. What remains in darkness feeds itself on avoidance. But the moment you look with presence, with honesty, with clarity, it begins to lose form. You don't need to earn your way out of suffering. You don't need to prove that you've suffered enough. The path is not through more effort, but through deeper lucidity, through recognizing that the cost you keep paying is no longer required. Neville Goddard expands this. When you assume a new internal state of being, you no longer resonate with what kept you bound. It's not about fighting the old. It's about becoming incompatible with it. You don't clear the energy debt by struggling. You dissolve it by remembering your truth, your worth, your right to peace. This is the moment when the field changed, not because you did more, but because you finally stopped giving power to what never defined you. You released the roles, the regret, the silent loyalty, and from that inner closing, life opened. Because when internal cycles are honored and completed, the outer world follows, naturally, effortlessly, coherently. You're not stuck. You're just still financing with your energy something that has already expired. And the moment you choose to stop paying, the moment you breathe and release and return to alignment, the universe doesn't punish, it responds. And it will respond by offering you back everything you thought you had to fight for, in the form of freedom, vitality, and spiritual credit far beyond what you ever believed was possible.